and I guess what I'm sort of thinking too about the sort of the isolation of the heroic individual. I mean, I'm very much, sort of an individual scholar. I'm not someone who is involved in sort of collaborative projects and research, but I believe very much in other forms of collaboration. I feel, sort of in departments and in faculties. I mean, one of the purposes of this is to try to get us talking together, so we're not just all, sort of thinking individually. If there's, we're going to try to open the gap together, or just, and that's one of my worry about the sort of leaving it to sort of individuals is what happens to that. It's just, and people get tired and burned out, as we've seen sort of happening. So the need for some kind of group or discussion, I think, is very. But I don't know. I also just don't know what that would take. What form that would take. Yeah.
I think there's always the question of shifting it where, who's responsible, or is it our fault? It's been emphasized. If people are getting jobs, if people are attending classes in humanities, then we're not the one. After all, the money comes from the states. Mm-hmm. If they choose to stop funding it, we can say whatever we want. We can say that what we do is groundbreaking or will be wonderful, whatever we say. We're not the one making the decisions towards the end. I think we know why we do it, whether because it's interesting, it does create jobs. There are lots of money. So maybe I'm getting a bit carried away by this, but maybe the question is, what is the purpose of the state and of democracy? Because then we are electing those governments. But maybe there's a problem that in the states, if we look at it, I think in the provincial cases, in any party, I think in the fairly small ones, but these are the three main parties. All those people are often coming from the same background. They are either MBAs or lawyers. And if they will all be classicists, I guess maybe we would have.
The whole big
Of course, being from the same background, we would have similar ideas. But since they all come from the same backgrounds, of course, they have very precise ideas of what's the place of an individual in society. Just wondering, should we have laws for doctors that should have a more diverse background rather than just a band of MBAs and lawyers who had a very precise training? That they'll have strength, but also have support and weaknesses because their talents and interests are one-sided.
But one thing that strikes me, and I'm thinking about it, also European situation, which is kind of different from North America. I mean, for example, one thing that I found very puzzling in the last few years, that in Italy, you had two high school types. One was the scientific liceo and the classical liceo. When I was going through school a long time ago, let's leave it at that. The classical high school was becoming very small, very elite, very few people, usually from privileged families, they did not care too much about what job they might have later on. They were sent there because that was the classical school. But it was really disappearing. You go back now, it's full of people. There are students now. So that's kind of weird. On the other hand, when I look at Italy, we look at the fact that there has been massive scholarization. The percentage of people in society that have gone through a university degree has never been this high. And most of these people, particularly in Italy, went through the humanities disciplines. They have degrees, even the law degree is more of a humanities degree. But anyway, and then you look at the level of public discussions about these issues and the kind of public or political debate. It's a disaster. It's disastrous. So at some point, we also have to think about, these ideas that if we have more people going through this education, that, I don't know. I mean, we have to also ask ourselves, what are we actually doing, and are we actually promoting a kind of the possibility of a structural change, or are we in fact creating, in the end, in spite of what we think we're doing, creating the kind of subject that are functional to the system. Because, I mean, politically speaking, I mean, this melancholy thing, you know, we are melancholic about the Christian Democrats in relation to Berlusconi, you know, and this is happening in the 80s and 90s where the population of Italy has never been so massively scholarized through essentially humanities degrees.
And of course now it's a situation where the unemployment for the generation sort of 18 to 25 in Italy is at one of its highest. So there's the bad argument that because there are no jobs, they can just they do this because there's no point in doing something, you know, in doing something that will get you a job. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't see you back there.
Well, I try to keep the gap open by publishing what people in the humanities do in my current job, but also that's with McGill University Press. And I also edited a series for the press on the history of ideas. And before I came to McGill Queens, I funded the humanities for 10 years. And one of the big problems that I saw, this was at the in the Humanities and Social Science Division of the Canada Council, I'm then SHIRT. And again, I'm on a SHIRT panel for journals this fall. But one of the big problems that we have in humanities, as I see it, is that we require so little money in what we do. And it is also from an individual standpoint, and I see this in my press, it's easier to ask for $1 million than it is to ask for $3,000. The workload is the same. And so we have also, over the years, since the Humanities and Social Science, the two councils were founded in Canada by the Rockefeller Foundation in the 1940s, created structures that were supposed to safeguard our interests, and that they is SHIRT and the federations. And, well, there's one federation now. But as I saw it from an insider when I was at council and at the federation, and then as I see it now as being a supplicant to them and begging for money, is that we require so little money in what we do. And for example, for a scholarly book, they still give $8,000, which a budget for a scholarly book is anywhere between $50,000 and $60,000. And now we're getting to the point where they say that what humanists provide should also be given away free through open access. So one of the big problems that I see in funding in the humanities is that we, over the years, we have been downgraded. And I really believe that a political initiative has to be taken to address that balance that has totally gone the other way. And in a lot of cases, I'm sorry to say this, but you know, the one person that I dearly love on this campus is the president of the Canadian Federation for the Humanities. But these organizations now are more interested in the funding that they get to perpetuate themselves than in representing the interests of the people they're supposed to be representing. And I really think that until this is understood by government, by the councils that are supposed to represent us, and it's not only the Humanities and Social Science Council, but also some of the Science Council, that what we do is totally being undervalued, and that has to change.
Yeah, there's an ironic point about the fact that we're cheap, which leading to a kind of downgrading, because it is one of the frustrations that, you know, for many of us, we don't need a lot of money, but it's easier to get a lot of money than it is to get a really lot of money when we really need it.
I want to challenge one assumption, and then I want to pick up on something that Regina and Phil raised here. The assumption that's troubling me is the notion that what we do is very individualist, that we work on our own, and I don't believe that's true. I think what we actually do in our classrooms is we individuals how to engage with the best thinking that we see as available, which is actually teaching them to engage, and then we do that in a non-political term. I think one of the reasons humanities were so threatened as an ideological tool was precisely because we are able to galvanize a kind of way of thinking with a group of people. I think we are useful to businesses when businesses send students to us to learn. They do it to raise EQ, because reading novels allows people to engage with other ways of thinking, to imagine another time through anthropology or through history. I think what we do is actually all about engagement and galvanizing a kind of sense of community, and I think we better figure that out and realize that that's actually what we're doing, even when we're sitting, alone with a computer or with a book. That we are actually galvanizing that sense of community and thought. And then the next step is to say, I'm hearing we're not the decision makers, we are. The decision makers are people who are trained in the humanities, and what's more, I think we need to take it on ourselves, and I'm saying this in the plural, we shape stories, and stories ultimately change action. If you think about tobacco, why did we manage to bring in tobacco laws? That was because of the trigger point of children. And the story was, we don't want more children smoking, and suddenly action took place. We need to shape the story, and that's why I was listening to what Darin was saying on the film. We need to say we are valuable, we need money, we need to advocate for it, and as a group, we have to work out what our story is and start to articulate it really clearly.
But in order to do that, we need to gather data, and that's what we're very poor at doing. We haven't documented. That's, in my view, that's what really, in order to effect change, you have to present that data to the forces that be, whether it's Darth Vader or whoever it might be. We haven't been very good at that. We haven't quantified.
That's why we as a group, when Twitter allows to give their data set for study, we should be all over that, even though there's a 2-week time frame by the time we hear that comes. Skip lines around the room, but some of the potential of digital humanities is huge, because groups work together, they actually do quantitative as well as qualitative analysis, and we need to think with our partners working in social sciences as well on some of the quantitative information. I agree with you, I think we're starting to do that.
For grants now, we have to document how many, and we can do that, how many hits we get on our website. You can also do that, with departments, etc. How many blogs, so on and so on. And I think that's what, as humanists, we have to do it. We really have, some of us, I think, in humanities consider that to be dirty work, but it's very useful work in getting a message across.
Well, yes. When the Darin is starting to talk about, evaluating people's application for tenure on the basis of how the impact is gauged by journals and lists that are extremely problematic for certain disciplines. This kind of quantitative data has to be handled extremely carefully.
I think there's the question about sort of how the data is shaped, because we've seen the nightmare in England, of course, where the sort of impact, the demonstrability of impact is measured in very, very limited ways, where the kinds of statistics or information that we might have, that we might find interesting. For example, Alex, you're sort of the people who had the sort of humanities background, who've gone on to be CEOs. That's from our perspective, that could be very interesting information and useful. And yet not measurable by certain expectations about.
It's also terrible.
Or also, how can you can't demonstrate that their humanities degree gave them that, sort of got in that position. You have to point out.
Yeah, so I wanted to speak to what Francois said quickly, because I think that, it is striking that politicians all have the same background, because I think the politics of the profession, like any other, realistically, there tends to be a smaller set of people. How we penetrate that is another matter. But I'm sort of on the fence here as to what things we can control and what things we can't control. I may be overly cynical in this, because I just got out of, just yesterday I had a meeting as part of the PPP, space restructuring plan, in which I was told there's a spatial crisis at McGill. because there are too many people. Well, if there's too many people at the university, whose fault is that? Right? If there's suddenly no space for all these graduate students that we have, then, well, is that their fault or is that our fault for admitting too many graduate students? In the same way, this report that I cited from the McGill Working Group, it mentions that more than 50% of PhD candidates in history or in the humanities wind up being unemployed in academia. Well, whose fault is that? Right? Is that their fault for not finding a job? Is that the fault of the academy for admitting too many graduate students? Is that the fault of the university for admitting too many people? So there, I mean, yes, there are these big conceptual questions of outreach and justifying our own existence that we can ask. But then also, I mean, the more realistic, more manageable sides of this crisis, real or otherwise, are perhaps much more immediate, much more easily resolved. Right? They take practical responses, practical problems, and we tend to lose sight of that.
We'll have to break now because the English department is about to come in. I hope that people will be able to come to the last session, which will be April 1st from 3 to 5 in the Wendy Patrick room, which is University's School of Social Work. I can't remember the address, but it's on University just above Berks, so quite obvious, I think. And I wanted that meeting to sort of be bringing up, sort of trying to bring together so much of the discussion we've had. And I think particularly, I mean, what we're kind of sort of circling around, and now we're going to have to grapple is what can we do? Sort of what is within ourselves. We can't do much about the stars at the moment, but what in ourselves can we do to remedy the situation? Whether it's the kinds of activism that Darin is talking about, or advocacy in terms of statistics, or whether it should be also Eugenia's point at the university or outside. What can be done, I think, to try to keep the gap open. So anyway, thanks again very much to the folks for today.